So one of the things that always confused me as an American, the same thing is true, or is supposed to be true, in America, but it ends up actually not being true. So in the American Constitution, education isn't mentioned, therefore it is left to the states to control. However, the federal government effectively does in many ways control the education system. Does anyone know why or how it claimed this power? Well, money, exactly. Money and funding. Apparently 92% of the state's budgets overall comes from the state, but that extra 8%, if you want it, you have to follow the guidelines of the federal government. Why? Because of Sputnik. After Sputnik made its way to orbit the planet, the United States said, we need to invest in education because education is national defense. And national defense is controlled by the federal government in the United States. Think about that for a second. Education is national defense. Now, some say we've had another Sputnik moment, but we're not going to get into that. Let's talk about in the Jewish context. Education is national defense. We find the same in a midrash about this week's Torah portion. Who would have thought? Following the destruction of the Second Temple, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught that if you walk past destroyed towns, you would find that there was a theme of why those towns were destroyed. Because they didn't have rabbis. I think he was trying to work up some business as well, but I'm not sure. That's. And when Rabbi Aseh and Rabbi Ami went to go inspect the defenses of each town, they would go and ask for the defenders of the city to be brought forth. Defenders in the city in the Aramaic here is Neturei Karta, which we won't touch on, but that's a group that is not, that you'll see is aligned to this idea that we're going to see in a second. The cities would bring out the police and the constables, and the rabbis would cry out, but where are the true defenders of the city? The scholars. So this Midrash from Eicha Rabbah is both highly problematic and has a grain of truth inside of it. So 2,000 years later on, in our modern day, we know of those voices which say that the defenders of Israel are those studying in the yeshivot, those that are exempt from army service. They are the true defenders of Israel, and it comes from this midrash. Because of their prayers, Israel is safe. This also is where some who support the work of the Reform Movement and the Hartman Institute in Israel find some marriage of ideas. Because the Hartman Institute tries to make sure that the generals of the army are Torah scholars, bringing to them ideas of ethics and morality. What does it mean to lead an ethical army? An army who focuses not just on tactical gains, but also on an idea that the Jewish state should live up to Jewish values. The Midrash continues. A little further down, Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said, there were never philosophers of the stature of Bilam ben Beor and Avinimus Hagardi, because they asked this question, how can we outmatch the Jewish people? Their answer, go around to their synagogues. If the children there are chirping with their voices, you will not be able to overcome them. Leave and come back another day. But if the synagogues are quiet, then you might be successful. Because it says, in Parshat Toldot. Hakol kol Yaakov, v'yadayim yadei Esav. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. When there are voices in the synagogues and study halls, the people are Jacob's. But when there are not, the hands are given to Esau. This is the scene, if you can remember it, when Jacob is put upon by his mother, who's trying to get her favorite son to be the inheritor of the Jewish people. And she puts on his arms the animal skin. And so when the blind Isaac reaches out, he feels the hands. And he says, this most beautiful feature that you have when I think of my son Jacob is the voice of mellifluous elocution, calming care. This is what I think of when I think of my son Jacob. And when I think of my son Esau, with that animal hair, I think of brutality, the hunt, ones who bring death. Not mentioned in this midrash, but we know in the minds of the rabbis, Esau becomes later the model of the Crusades and Christendom and the idea of the majority against that of the Jewish minority, right? The hands are the hands of Esau, bringing violence, and the Jewish voices, the idea of masculinity in the temple Torah study is the voice singing beautifully in the synagogue. During the First World War, the Great War, Hyman G. Enelo preached in his New York synagogue, "There are those who would have us believe that the son of the synagogue has set. One is supposed even to be able to qualify as a good Jew and excellent Jewish leader, although they stand outside the synagogue and sneer at its ideals. Yet, there was never a time when the synagogue was more needed or had a higher function to perform than right here in North America. It is here that it must proclaim the spiritual purpose of the Jew, signalize the lofty religious aim of his millennial struggle and endurance, his and her, and stand forth as the center of Israel's organized, collective, and active idealism. There's no time more than we need the synagogue to teach the values of Judaism, to bring them forth into the battlefields of life, both here in Canada and in Israel, to prioritize study and learning. And what does it take to reach this goal? According to the midrash we read earlier, the voice of Jacob, not just the voice of study in the midrash, but specifically the voice of children returning to the study hall, learning in the Beit Midrash. We pray soon that the children will be returning to Holy Blossom Temple, to our services. They're already starting to come on Friday mornings for Little Blossoms. They're already starting to come online for Shabbat, even though they're muted. And I can't hear them then. I can't hear their beautiful chirping. But soon we know they will be back here. And when they come, we pray that we will be able to welcome them, to tolerate their beautiful noise, and know that in them is our future for our synagogue. Shabbat Shalom.